So we talked the first night about the nature of religion itself, how it is really about awe and fear and being overwhelmed, and also reconnecting to life and culture. After that, we talked about the sacred in Native American religions. Last week we talked about myth in Hinduism. And tonight we're talking about ritual in Buddhism. So what we do here is we take what I call 5 lenses on world religions, on religion, and that is the sacred, myth, ritual, community, and the individual. And we look through those lenses at each of, I think it's 10, or I guess it's 9 world religions. And we look differently every time. Now, of course, we could talk about myth in Buddhism, or ritual in Hinduism, of course, but rather than give you a list of historical dates and or statistics about adherence or things like that, I like to just use these lenses. So it's such a big field for each religion. This helps us kind of reduce and focus on something, but of course, in the discussion, anything is fair game, and of course, like I said, there's a lot more to Buddhism than ritual, but these lenses do line up pretty nicely with the religions that we're studying. So next week, for example, next week we're off for Thanksgiving. The next lecture, which will be the week after, will be on community, religious community in Chinese religions, which that really works, right? All right, so just by way of commercial, for those who haven't heard it, we are an online nonprofit wisdom school. So we offer a degree completion program, degree completion program for the bachelor's degree. Everything is online, and we have 2 master's degree programs, and we are on the cusp of getting a PhD program in philosophy. So good stuff happening. All right, and then again, feel free to, if you have a question during the lecture, feel free to just stop me and ask. These are not erudite lectures. They're just me talking. So feel free to talk to. This week we do have some audience mics for you. So maybe don't use the mic while I'm talking, but we have a question and answer period at the end, and I'm going to see if I can give you all some more time with that by doing a little better with my time this week. All right, so enough of that. Here we go. Ritual, the body, symbol, and magic. So again, for each lens, the sacred, myth, ritual, etc., we are breaking that up into 2 parts. So this is the ritual part 1, focusing on the body, symbol, and magic in Buddhism. So like last week with myth, the vocabulary here is different from popular culture. Myth is used in popular culture to mean something that's untrue, that's purported to be true but is untrue, and we're going to show you how it's untrue, and so you don't believe a myth anymore. But last week we saw how there are actually 3 definitions of myth, and the most profound one is that of something that is true. The myth is the story you're enacting. It's the story you're living out. So of course it's true. It's true experientially and existentially. Ritual is a little bit like that, in that I think many of us, when we hear the word ritual, think of empty ritual, perhaps, something you have to do, a graduation ceremony you have to sit through, several graduations. Apparently that's a thing now, where kids are graduating from kindergarten. Is that right? Anyway, so yeah, lots of rituals are like that. But again, in terms of religious studies, we don't mean that. We're not dealing with the mundane, we're dealing with the sacred. And in terms of ritual and the sacred and religious studies, these three elements appear: the body, symbol, and magic. So the body is actually a problem for many of the world's religions. Of course, you know, in Western culture, the body has been theologically seen as the source of sin. In Eastern cultures, especially last week with Hinduism, asceticism was a prominent mode of being, religious being, where you deny the body in order to achieve enlightenment. The body's always been a problem. At the same time, the body is really the center of our world. The body is the axis mundi of our world. Everything revolves around our bodies. It is our place. And even if we're moving, our place moves with us. All the sense data comes through here. Even our understanding of ourselves and our soul and our mind, all these concepts are centered in the body. I'm teaching Descartes this week to some students online, and I'm not going to inflict Descartes on you, but you may have heard of the mind-body problem that he instituted. That's our problem. The body's problem is that we tend to denigrate the body in favor of the mind for all kinds of reasons. And yet, ritual involves the body. In fact, I would say that ritual is putting your body in touch with the sacred. Okay, so there are lots of mystical and conceptual elements to religion, thoughts, theologies, ideas, lots going on up here, but the most grounded and immediate religious expression is through ritual, through your body, right? So the body also, while being a problem, is also a vehicle for the sacred. It is the center, the axis mundi, therefore it connects the sacred and the profane or the mundane. So, for example, for Catholics, the Eucharist is centered on the body and blood of Jesus, and that is the miracle of the Eucharist. Similarly, you can go to the Sundance for Plains Indians, and the body is the sacred space. Of course, there's sacred space around it. In fact, we didn't talk about this during the sacred lecture, but sacred space itself usually has gradations within it. So yeah, in a ritual, the Sundance in particular, you mark off sacred space, but then the body is the primary sacred space in that ritual. Now, here's where we get to the language of religion and to this nexus between the sacred and the mundane or the profane. And that is the symbol. So, as I said, the symbol is the language of religion. Why? Because of the nature of symbols. Religion, most religions, I always hesitate to say all about religion, so I'm just going to say most. As we saw in our first lecture from William James, are about coming into harmony with some unseen order, whether that order's up or in or whatever, it's aligning ourselves to that unseen order. Well, ourselves is here. This is ourselves in our bodies, and yet the unseen order, it transcends our bodies. And so how do you connect them? This was Descartes' problem. How do you connect mind and body? For the religious answer to that is through the symbol. So symbols are unique in that they are mundane, but they point to the sacred. They are profane, but they point to the sacred. How do they do that? Well, first of all, we don't have any other choice but to use the mundane, because we don't have the sacred here. Oh, let me pull off the sacred, a sacred, not a sacred object, but the sacred. How do I pull that off the shelf and say, okay, now we're going to do this sacred ritual? You can't. You have only the mundane. And so you must make that mundane a vehicle for the sacred. How do you do that? Through ritual. You consecrate it, right? And so in Mass or the Eucharist, what is bread and wine becomes the body and blood of Jesus through the ritual, right? So, and it's not a symbol. It's a symbol at the beginning for Catholics. It's not a symbol at the end. For Protestants, it's symbols all the way down. And so there's this wonderful process at work of taking the mundane, the profane, consecrating it, which is to make it sacred, and allowing us through that symbol to enter into sacred space and time. That's the other thing. Remember, we talked about sacred space and time in our second lecture discussion. Sacred space and time are different. The space is ordered differently. The time flows differently, such as not flowing at all. Ritual invokes that. So in a ritual, you are pretty much invoking sacred space and time through the process of consecration. So once the ritual is over, once sacred time is over, the symbol is no longer being consecrated. It is no longer functioning as that vehicle, right? Because it cannot, unless you are in a Native American worldview, where everything is sacred and relational. But that's from lecture 2. All right, so we don't just, again, grab things off the shelf and make them sacred symbols. We have a choice. We have made choices about these sacred symbols, and we reuse them. Now, this is a very tricky and kind of theoretical issue, but the question behind the use of sacred symbols is, how much does the symbol participate in the reality of the sacred? Well, again, on the theoretical level, maybe even on the experiential level, none. The symbol points. It isn't the sacred. It's the vehicle. But we forget that, right? And it's so easy to forget that. And so the things, the vehicles, become sacred, which does what? Blocks our view, our participation in the sacred that they're supposed to be pointing to, right? So we get caught up, we get the sacred tripped up in the mundane. We do this all the time, right? So a book, a sacred book, might have the sacred in it. Instead of pointing to the sacred, it might become sacred itself. A certain ritual might become sacred itself. And I'm speaking theoretically and abstractly, but we feel this viscerally. So if, for example, someone were to desecrate a grave of your loved one, that's purely symbolic, right? Nothing's happening there, purely, but you're not going to like it because you participate. You know what the symbol does. The symbol, the headstone or the marker, and what that's supposed to represent And so to desecrate the thing looks a lot like desecrating the sacred. This is a very tricky area. And so we developed the concept of taboo, which is certain things cannot be sacred. So this is the definition of taboo. A social or religious custom prohibiting or forbidding discussion of a particular practice or forbidding association with a particular person, place, or thing, right? It's really hard to pull apart the sacred and the profane. And so we say, you know what? Don't touch that. Don't eat that. Don't do that. Don't marry him. Don't go over there. There's actually a fascinating study anthropologist Mary Douglas did called Purity and Danger. And she's writing about taboo. Basically, she was really focusing on the Jewish dietary laws. You know what I'm talking about. Don't put milk and meat in the same cupboard, etc. Those very ordered and strict dietary laws from Leviticus. And don't eat swine, of course. And I don't know about you, but I've always gone, what is that about? And she has an elegant and beautiful explanation. She says it's about purity and danger. It's about ordering the world. And she says it's all connected. So it's not this arbitrary list of dietary laws. It's actually a consistent worldview that is about, she says, and I think she's right, guarding entrances and exits. And again, I don't want to go into this too much because we have a lot to do, but if you look, the dietary laws are about what comes in. There's also laws about what goes out and what can be touched and when and how. And these are entirely consistent with the marriage laws. Do not marry those people over there because they are outside, right? And if you marry them, they come in, right? So she sees there a consistent taboo system that actually makes a lot of sense if you understand, again, the body as a symbol for the culture or the people. So as you do with your body, you do with your people. Now, I love magic. I'm using magic right now with my old MacBook from 2012. I'm using magic right now with this microphone. Magic is simply manipulating the world to your own ends. I've got to go to the doctor soon, and I don't think I've ever told her this, but I've always wanted to. Like, you're really a medicine woman. Because I don't know what she does. She looks and prods and pokes and draws blood and then reads it or has somebody read it and tell me what it says. That's no different from a shaman. Functionally, no different at all. I don't know what's happening. I depend on her to tell me. And I trust her because I get better, usually. So magic has been a part of religion from the beginning, as far as we can tell, and it is still part of religion and part of our life. Sir James George Fraser wrote a book several volumes called The Golden Bough that we have in our library. And it was basically a catalog of the world's rituals at the time. And he developed from there the sense that culture proceeds from magic, this kind of blind manipulation of the world, to religion, with this kind of more intentional, more effective manipulation of the world, to science, where, we really understand the world now. And he said there were, sorry, losing my voice. He said there were two kinds of magic. There was sympathetic magic, where like produces like, Again, see, that's working on the symbolic level, like and like. So the classic example here is from Vodun, that comes across as voodoo for most people with the doll. There are variations of that throughout the world in all religions. This is like that. If I do this to that, then this will happen to this thing over here that it represents. See the importance of the symbol, the resonating there? Then there is, he says, contagious magic. I really like this, contagious magic. It'd be a great band name, I think. Maybe in the 90s, if we were in the 90s. Contagious magic is transmission of power via contact. And if you don't think we believe in contagious magic, just go to Hollywood Boulevard, or go to any sporting event, or go to any concert. Why do we need these people's signatures? These celebrities, these athletes. Why do we want souvenirs? It's contagious symbolism. It's contagious magic. And again, it's a weakened version for sure, but you know, that book I bought at that American bookstore in Paris, I remember that. Yeah, that was a great summer. So you see, it's conveying, the symbol's working. And of course, probably the most famous example of contagious magic is the Yom Kippur scapegoat, which is amazing, where the ancient Hebrews would take their sins and literally lay them onto this goat, the scapegoat, and then and then send it out into the wilderness to Azazel. So how cool is that, to take your sins for the year, symbolically lay them on this poor goat, and then send the goat out into the desert? Why would we do something like that? Because it works, you know, because we're symbol-using creatures, and that's powerful stuff. There's a tradition in Ireland called the Sin Eater. You ever heard about this? Yeah, wonderful. I mean, wonderful and weird, like all rituals. A person dies, and you put the food on the corpse during the wake, and then you come eat off the dead person to take away his sins before he moves on. Symbols are powerful, and if we are blind to them, then we're not aware of our path through the world, I would say. All right. So I mentioned the shaman, I mentioned the medicine woman, just briefly. This is a person who lives on that border between the sacred and the profane. So again, symbolically, shamans typically do not live in the village. They live on the periphery of the village. Why? Because they're on the edge. They're literally on the edge of the village, and so symbolically they're on the edge of the sacred and the profane. 1 foot in each world. So when things go wrong, when there's a drought, when the crops are not coming in, when there's a sickness, you go to the shaman, because that guy or woman is in touch with the unseen order, and you've got to bring the unseen order in order to heal. That's just generally understood. Joseph Campbell, and I think he's right about this, saw artists as the shamans of Western culture, people who live on the edge, again, symbolically and literally, and who are always trying to bring in this other order, right? This other way of seeing, as John Berger would put it. All right. So the nature and function of ritual is this. It's putting our bodies, our flawed, broken, problematic bodies, right in touch with the sacred. And in that process, the body becomes a symbol. And in that process, magic happens. We can manipulate the world by using the body as a channel for the sacred, for that unseen order to come in and heal, overturn, end the world sometimes, begin the world other times, or just remind us that there's more than this. All right, so let's shift now to Buddhism and the life of Siddhartha Gautama. 6th century BCE, probably. We don't know exactly, so he's kind of a legendary figure. Again, BCE is more historically accurate, before the Common Era, versus CE, the Common Era, or AD. It's also, the existentialist philosopher Karl Jaspers called this time the liminal age. And that word liminal is going to come up again with ritual in our second lecture on, or discussion on ritual. Liminal just means between, in between. So the reason he said this is that around the time of Siddhartha, you've got Lao Tzu in China, you've got Plato and Socrates in ancient Greece. You've got some of the playwrights too, the ancient Greek playwrights. You've got Zoroaster that we're going to talk about in a few weeks. There just seems to be a lot happening during these few centuries, and you can make of that what you will. He made a lot of it thinking that something mystical and cosmological was happening, and maybe it was. But Siddhartha was part of that. So again, the body, symbol, and magic, right? So Siddhartha's mother was Queen Maya, and it was said at his conception that she dreamed of a white elephant with 6 tusks entering her right side. This is fairly common with founders. We're now into the religions of founders, and so we get these wonderful stories of the founders. Remember, Hinduism doesn't have a founder. Native American religions don't really have a founder. They don't have this central figure. But from now on, we're going to have it, and you've got to ascribe miracles and magic to the birth of your founder, right? And that happens with the Buddha. Signs and wonders. You may know this story. It's a great story. His father was a Kshatriya, wealthy warrior class in ancient India, actually what is now Nepal. And he was protected by his father for 29 years. I don't know what it is, but right around 30, watch out. If you're not 30 yet, watch out. No, really, I mean, let's talk about axial ages. 30 seems to be a time of religious upheaval, revelation, etc., at least in many of these founders. So he's protected. He doesn't leave the castle or the grounds there. And then he's just had enough. Again, 30. You start to get restless, you start to wonder, is this all there is? And sure enough, he leaves the grounds with his friend Ananda. And he sees an old man, a sick man, a dead man, and an ascetic. An ascetic is what we talked about, was a person who denies the body, even punishes the body, because it's a barrier to the sacred. He's never seen these things. It's the fall. Right? It's the same story as the fall. They did not know good and evil, and now they do. Siddhartha did not know good and evil. He did not know age, illness, or death, or a religious way. And so he leaves. He has a child, a wife, a child, and he leaves to become an ascetic, because Siddhartha was a Hindu. What else would you be? He was not a Buddhist. He was a Hindu. So So he does what the religious people around him do, and that is become an ascetic. And he starts punishing his body. And again, this is legend, but I don't mind that. I like it. It's good stories. Some legends say that he had learned to live on a single grain of rice a day. And if you look at the Indian depictions of the Buddha, of Siddhartha, there's one wonderful sculpture of his ribs showing and the folds of his gown matching his ribs. It's really beautiful and kind of horrifying too. So, okay, punish this body. This body is impermanent, right? I cannot be connected to this body. And so I must deny. Well, and you meditate too, because you're not doing anything else, right? That's a little flip. Of course you meditate. You want to be connected to the one and be released from samsara. You want to achieve moksha, release, so you don't keep getting born again into this life of impermanence and sorrow. So again, this is a great story. I love it. So he's meditating on the side of a river, and he's so weak he passes out and falls into it. And there's a young girl who's made some pudding, and she's taking it to market, and she sees him fall into the river. She goes and pulls him out. She thought he was a ghost at first because he looked so emaciated. And she gave him some of the pudding, this Indian pudding, I believe it's called gasayam. Anyway, pudding, that'll get you off the ascetic track, right? It's sugar and milk kind of rolled up. So he's like, rethinks his position based on pudding. And he says, all right, I've got to figure this out. I can't be falling into the river all the time. There's got to be something else, some other way. And I'm just going to sit here under this Bodhi tree. And he does so for 49 days. And that's actually a graft of the Bodhi tree, supposedly. And he achieves enlightenment. And that's when he gets the title Buddha, or the enlightened one. And what does he teach? He teaches the middle way. And so he grew up as a prince with every desire fulfilled. And then he went out from there and denied fulfilling every desire, including the desire to eat. Two extremes. The Buddha teaches the middle way, right? Avoid hedonism, avoid asceticism, which is really a kind of hedonism let's not bring Freud into it. The middle way. And that's when it becomes a new religion, different from Hinduism. I always think it's interesting that the Buddha died at 80 from having eaten spoiled food. I don't know, it just seems a cruel irony. Starts with pudding, ends with spoiled food. Oh, right. So yeah, after he achieves enlightenment, I love this part too, he goes and has a meal. Middle way, right? I don't need to deny. I don't need to overindulge. I'm just going to have a meal. And his friends leave him. What? You're eating a meal? I'm out of here. But then some other people come along and say, hey, that makes a lot of sense. This is really kind of hard, living on a grain of rice a day, and having insects on our body and living in the woods. And these first followers become what's called the Sangha, or the monastery. And it's still an important element of Buddhism. All right, so what did he teach? Here's what he taught. Tanha. Tanha is to burn, or its desire. The Sanskrit word is like flame. Samsara means when you touch the flame of one life to the next, and so the flame keeps burning, right? Samsara. And so you're going to come back. As long as that flame of desire is burning, you're going to come back. And as long as you touch that flame to the next life, you will continue to burn. What we want is nirvana. We want to extinguish the flame. So again, in popular culture, we tend to use nirvana either to refer to grunge rock or as a synonym for heaven. It is not a synonym for heaven. It is to extinguish, to put out the flame. And that's the highest goal, to put out the flame. Well, I messed up my slides, didn't I? Okay. Yeah. So these teachings about tanha and nirvana become embodied in one of the great statements of religion in the history of the world, the Four Truths, the Four Noble Truths, and the Eightfold Path. So, the Four Truths: life is suffering, life is tanha. Life is suffering, life is pain. I always like to tell people, if you're going to start a religion, that's a good place to start. Life is suffering. Suffering is caused by tanha, by desire. Love these simple steps. We have a course here called Buddhist Psychology and Methods of Healing, and the professor here says, this is like a doctor's prescription. And I'd never thought of that till I heard her lecture on that. That's exactly what it is. All right, do this, then do that, because X, Y, and Z. Life is suffering. Suffering is caused by desire. Desire can be broken. That in itself is an amazing statement. Our desires can be broken. And he doesn't mean, the desire for the new MacBook Pro with the touch screen, or the iPhone 7, or whatever, or a new apartment. He means that. He means not only the desire to have, but in fact the desire to be. Simply the desire to be will trip you up. But that, too, can be broken. How? By following the Eightfold Path. And this is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and concentration. So you kind of see there the development of a religion. Begins up here with noble truths and moves to action, or in some cases, inaction. The Buddha also taught anatman. You may remember last time, if you were here, and by the way, the lectures are on our YouTube channel. Katie's done a great job putting them up there and editing out my faults, some of them. So in Hinduism, there is, and especially in the Upanishads, there's the notion of Atman, which is a kind of echo of Brahman, which is the one. But Atman is here. It is us. It is our soul. Buddha said, no, you don't have a soul. Anatman. What you think is a soul is this constellation of body, feelings, understanding, will, and consciousness. And all that connected to the world of illusion, the impermanence. And so, no soul. As my friend Pramangang used to tell me, no self, no problem. What happens after the Buddha? You've got this magnificent statement of life and truth and desire and a path, right? Surely this will work. Nope. One day after the Buddha's death, there was an argument about what he meant. his followers keep splintering until there's a council called within a year where they have to figure it out. Within a few years, there are 4 major sects of Buddhism. A few years for this wonderful teaching. Within 10 years, there are 16 sects of Buddhism. And in 390 BCE, there has to be a council called, there were many councils called, and this council called the majority of Buddhist heretics. The majority. And so the human element returns. Okay, so among these divisions, some have fallen off and some have remained. There are 2 major ones. Well, it's actually Hinayana, but we're going to call it Theravada, which is within Hinayana, which is the tradition of the elders. So as you might imagine, this is the more conservative. I think it's safe to say, yeah, tradition of the elders, that means conservative. It is based on the Sangha, the monastery. And it's expected. This is in Southeast Asia mainly. It's expected that young men go to the Sangha. I've hung around, I have some friends who are Buddhists, and I actually brought them to my campus where I was teaching, and I thought, wow, this is going to be great. They're going to be monks everywhere in saffron robes meditating. No, they went straight for the computer lab. Because it's now cultural, right? And so the guys are just supposed to go. That's what they're supposed to do, like Americans are supposed to go to college, if that's true anymore. There's a wonderful book by Jan Willem van der Wettering called The Empty Mirror. He's this Dutch guy in the 70s who decides he's going to go to a Zen monastery and do the path. And he gets there, he's older and he's stiff and he can't really sit right and he keeps falling asleep and he's just really ashamed of himself and he talks to one of the young monks there and he's like, how do I do this? And they're like, just wait, you'll be out in a year or 2. Wait, what? I'm supposed to be achieving enlightenment. We just come here because our parents make us. Again, culture. You can't escape culture, even in religion. We'll talk about that next week, by the way. So yeah, Theravadan Buddhists are usually in robes. They're usually in a monastery. And if you're a Theravadan Buddhist and you can't go to the monastery, then you must support the monastery. I have some stories about that if you're interested and we have time. Now, Mahayana Buddhism is called the expansive way. So accordingly, it is I was going to say missionary, but it spread. I don't want to imply that it's missionary and that they were trying to make converts. It was more just a natural spread of the religion. And of course, they have to, because they're not going to be the conservative element, they have to say, well, there's this story of the Buddha when he was teaching in Deer Park, where he grabbed a handful of leaves and he said, my teachings, they're like the leaves of the forest. You can just grab a few of them at one time. Well, that's brilliant, right? Because now you can take Buddhism into China. You can take it into wherever you want. It went to China first. You can take it into Japan. And when people say, but we worship this God. Oh, well, that works. Maybe that's a bodhisattva. Or maybe that's another God that the Buddha would recognize. So you see, you adapt the religion. Every religion is adapted to culture in some way. And every religion changes from the founder. It changes dramatically from the founder. And so eventually the Buddha becomes deified, which was not part of the story and would really makes no sense because gods in Buddhism? Nirvana, right? Extinguish. Nope. The Buddha becomes deified, other gods become recognized, bodhisattvas appear. These are people who became enlightened but decided to hang around and help us out, especially when Buddhism's moving into these new areas. Oh, this is your bodhisattva. I don't mean to sound flip, I just mean to say it's very functional, right? It's part of the adaptation. So there, like I said last time, you can believe almost anything and be a Hindu. You can believe almost anything and be a Buddhist. By the way, Buddhism in its native India and Nepal was just absorbed by Hinduism. So there are actually very few Buddhists in India because Hinduism is this thing, right? Oh, you want to do that? Sure. That's Hinduism. Okay. So the kinds of Buddhists, there's Pure Land Buddhists. This is a sect of Buddhism that believes in a pure land of the West that you will go to when you die. What? That sounds like a Western religion. Yes, it does. There's Zen, or Chan, which developed mostly in Japan and is based on meditation and achieving satori, or enlightenment. So also the short-circuiting of the rational mind. So you may know about Zen koans, right? These little riddles where the master may say, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And you're supposed to meditate on that, which means just short-circuiting your logic, which is a good thing. And there's no answer. The master will decide if you've answered it when he sees you developing spiritually. There's Tendai, there's Nichiren, which is a kind of, Tendai is a kind of rationalist sect. So they're like the philosophical Buddhism. They believe that you can think your way to enlightenment. There's Nichiren, which is a kind of Japanese national Buddhism. So again, it's located, like we talked about, in space. And in particular in this nation. And then, of course, there's Tibetan Buddhism, which is unique because it merged with the native religion in Tibet, which was called Bon. And so Tibetan Buddhism is very different. There's a lot of focus on mantras and manuals. They are in the red robes. Oh, okay. All right, I finished earlier than usual. So, thank you for your attention. Please feel free to ask questions at the mic, or if you don't want to get up and come to the mic, that's okay.